Hello and welcome to this live BrightTALK panel on marketing and advertising in a truly personalised world. My name is Josh Downs, I work at BrightTALK and I'll be moderating this session. Today I'm joined by Nick Badminton and James Girling. We'll have more on their introductions in just a little bit. Today we'll be discussing where we draw the line with augmented reality, or AR. It's been a bumper year with Pokemon Go taking the world by storm and dragging the AR industry into the spotlight. So what does the future hold in the realms of marketing and advertising? We'll be using Kaiichi Matsuda's hyper-reality video as a starting point, discussing how the boundaries will be set for consumers and how much our lives will change as a result of augmented reality infiltrating our daily lives. I'd like to remind you all to ask questions as we go through. A good panel is an engaged panel, so feel free to join the discussion and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible as we go and at the end. So, for some introductions, I run the AR and VR community at BrightTALK, where we are hosting this summit from and this session. Nick, do you want to give a bit of background to yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much. My name is Nick Badminton. I'm based over on the west coast of Canada in Vancouver, but I travel the world speaking and writing about how technology and society is changing. Augmented reality and virtual reality is an area that I've been following for a number of years now, and I'm pretty deeply involved in the community in North America.
Cool. And James, do you want to give a bit of background?
Sure. So actually, the reason for attending the call is I own an AR and VR channel, both on BrightTALK and on LinkedIn. Very active in sort of asking questions and listening to ideas in this area, and it's a hot area for me at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you both for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on. So let's jump straight into the first slide, the first video that we're going to be talking about, which is Kaiichi Matsuda's dystopian, perhaps, vision of a future of AR VR. So let me just slip into screen share and we can get the video up. Apologies for the lack of sound here, but it gives quite a good representation of an augmented world in the not too distant future. So there was the video Hyper Reality by Kaiichi Matsuda, which many of you will have seen before. It came out about 4 months ago. It's an incredibly visceral and vivid piece of art. One area I think sticks out most to me is the aspect of reward points and the system of rewarding people for spending, especially in retail. Nick, do you have any thoughts on that? About, is that going to be the key area where the AR industry tends to kind of grow, and you'll see a lot of movement?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at business, it's very core. Especially consumer packaged good brands. It's like, how do you get people to buy more and do more with them? Like, coupons have been there forever, and I think this is what Matsuda is actually saying here, that it's going to continue to be there, and this is sort of a wholly integrated loyalty system. However, how do we really broker the experiences that lead us to deeper brand engagement or earning points or doing certain activities? How can we motivate people to take part? Maybe loyalty will be earned by the amount of time doing associated activities, hanging out in certain places, or even talking about the brand with a certain number of people. The challenge is, how do you do that as a brand and be genuine, and how do you make your customers really love that experience? I think that augmented reality could actually help monitor loyalty and associate that with lifestyle, and that really works well with the brand. So you might have running and exercise as a lifestyle choice, but you actually earn loyalty points to Nike, or cooking healthy food with your family with loyalty to something like Whole Foods or another supermarket brand. I actually think that brands are going to have to integrate more with real life. And what's the biggest challenge, and I think Matsuda's like this interface overload, right, is that the user experience in augmented reality, what you surround yourself with, is going to have to step up and work out how humans are going to work in place and brands are going to work in place. And that's going to be a really, really tough job. And, we have to avoid a world that is like Matsuda's world, and it's going to be a lot more subtle, I think. But that association with lifestyle is going to be where loyalty is actually built, and that's the holy grail that even today the advertisers are still trying to crack.
It is a very kind of overwhelming vision. What kind of steps do you think the kind of the Tesco club cards or the Nectar points? What are the kind of next few steps they're going to need to take to get closer to this, to Matsuda's maybe quite daunting vision?
Well, this is actually, this is a layer on top of the existing loyalty programs. A lot of loyalty programs, it's very difficult to associate absolute value back to the business with the cost of running them, right? So this is an overarching cost that makes it even more expensive to build loyalty. I think this is going to come step by step. I don't think things are going to change drastically as we begin. I think that there'll be little bits and little moments here and there where you might be in the supermarket or you might be on the streets, and you'll come across occasional offers, and you might have certain events and certain days and certain times in locations that you can actually earn extra points or association with the brand. I think that's the first step. I think this immersive world is quite a long way away, but you're going to have to build whole functions that are actually working out. Customer experience is going to mean something very different when people are plugged into this reality, because it's like, okay, suddenly we've got 500,000 people in the UK at any point in time interacting with brands that are available, say, in a supermarket like Tesco's. What happens when we actually run the infrastructure and distribute like user experience, and how do we keep that fresh? You're going to have very large content development shops within these brands that are going to basically have to work all of the time to create something fresh and interesting. And that's going to be a huge overhead, right?
Sure. I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating as well. I mean, we saw with Pokemon Go that adding the gyms in kind of random churches in back streets you'd never go down. It kind of changed the pattern of people's behaviour, people's movements. So you can imagine kind of industries that were never there before, kind of piggybacking off the back of these paths you have to take to hit your certain rewards. When What about kind of gamification and how you think it'll influence the process? Do you think it's going to be a key aspect?
Personally, for me, gamification is key to so many different things. We all ultimately, if we undertake a certain action or do something in our daily lives or do something at work, actually the gratification from doing that just doesn't come from the altruistic nature of each individual. It actually comes from the ability to be recognized for that. So I think gamification is really important. I mean, if you look at Pokemon Go, it's about leveling up and it's about grinding the situation of playing different people and walking down the street. Unfortunately, something like Pokemon Go loses its shine really after a period of time, and you need to be fresh about what you actually get. And I think augmented reality needs to be integrated with real reality, and you need to get real things to keep you playing and keep you as part of that whole overall experience. So that's a consideration for brands as well.
I think you also made a good point, Nick, about I guess the potential for marketing and advertising divisions, although obviously there's potentially huge costs involved with tracking all of the data that's available. If you think of the possibilities that they're going to have access to this data about where people have been, what they've been up to, what they've seen, what they've heard, the friends that they've connected with. I mean, we've got big data at the moment, but this is kind of a whole new level of big data, and I think that opens so many doors when it comes to marketing teams about what they could potentially do. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I do. And this is where it gets tough. It's almost like you're going to be rewarded for being better at life than someone else. So it's quite dystopian, right? So, and what does that mean in terms of the quality and the experience as well? It's like I could be, you might have a brand that says, run 25 meters down this street, and if you do it in a certain time period, you get X amount of rewards. That's great. And until you realise that you've got people that have got disabilities that don't that restrict them from running potentially or moving quickly. But, do they not deserve that experience? It becomes very difficult. Like there's a moral, ethical dimension to things that marketers are going to have to consider. And today, marketers are just not very good at looking at experience. They're very good at working out messaging and pushing ads out there. They need to change. The modern marketer in the AR world is more of a user experience person than a traditional marketer today.
I think the point raised on the slide here as well is quite a poignant one, in that there's obviously a lot of potential for this to be used in the right way to get people to, go to the gym more, to lead healthier lives, or to try new products. I mean, that's sort of not too harmful, but where there could be questions raised is around whether sort of more controlling governments start introducing schemes to encourage social compliance. I mean, that's quite a scary thought. If for example, you wouldn't have access to the health service unless you'd done a certain number of healthy activities or something. That's when you start to kind of question the morality. At least in my mind, I think that's not the right sort of way for us to go.
Yeah, or insurance, right? Those kinds of things. I was in the States a couple of months ago, and there are actually some insurers that give you a widget to plug into your car, and you actually get cheaper premiums for being a safer driver. Which is great. So if you say you've got like the augmented reality widget and you opt into that, human equality, the ability to express yourself as an individual. Like you humans don't necessarily fall into particular behavior patterns that the governments want you to have. That's hugely dystopian. I don't think we're going to get to that point. I think brands will say, if you do X activity and Y activity, then absolutely, we're going to reward you for that. I think we're going to draw some very clear moral, ethical sort of boundaries of what shouldn't be done. And I think that's where it becomes really interesting with this augmented reality world, where you could be walking onto a street with 1,000 different experiences, and they're all fighting for your attention. It's like, who wins your attention? Who pays to get to the top of the pile, right? And as a human, how can you actually live your life without being overwhelmed?
Sure. And what about, do you think there'll be the same kind of checks and balances that you have currently with advertising to kind of stop being hit with the same repeated adverts again and again? Like you watch one Tony Hawk's skateboarding video and instantly you've got 5 adverts on your Facebook trying to flog you a new skateboard. Do you think they'll be able to kind of keep the controls in place so that you're not perpetually just pestered with adverts because you've engaged in certain areas?
I actually think advertising will disappear. Like banner ads and whatever. I actually think the technology providers and software hackers and hobbyists are going to actually build plugins to help block advertising. There's a very famous wearable computing founder called Steve Mann, based out of Toronto, who was wearing an early version of augmented reality. He invented the iTap system, and he actually had a built-in part of his vision that actually tuned out all the advertising in his view. And I think that's an absolute reality. So I think ads will disappear in the favor of experiences that are branded. So we'll have a Disney experience or a Toyota experience or even a tourism experience. And you're gonna have the feeling created by brands, but you're not necessarily gonna have the brands in your face. You're gonna have a 5-minute experience, and you're gonna know that it's associated with certain brands that you love, and you know that you're going to be rewarded for experiencing that as well.
Great. And what about the kind of final question we've got on this slide? Whether you think this sort of technology, where do you think it's going to lead, and what's your kind of take on the classic good or bad perspective?
I think sorry, Nick.
Sorry. No. Carry on.
I was going to say, I think it's bound to be a good thing overall. I mean, as long as it's personalised in the right way, and as Nick said earlier, it's not information overload. If we've got the capability to filter out all of the elements that aren't relevant to us as individuals, it can only be a good thing, really.
Yeah. I mean, good and bad is an individual perspective as well. Some people are going to love it. They're going to be in the experience. They're going to be running around. It's even with augmented reality experiences, there's LAR experiences over magazines or Pokemon Go or whatever. There are some people that buy into it and do it all the time, and they'll love it. And some people that will just start to think that this is ridiculous. And you're going to have a lot of people that choose to switch off. But those people that are going to switch off are going to be surrounded by people that have got 1,000-yard stares that are experiencing augmented reality. So you're going to have this dichotomy in society of those that are in and those that are not. And it's going to feel like, as my good friend Karis O'Connell from Archiac says, a very twitchy modern world experience where you kind of don't know what's real from what's not real, and you don't know who's interacting with you or if they're interacting with the data and information that surrounds you, right? So it's going to become very strange.
I think that leads nicely onto the next slide, which it kind of covers the view that potentially down the line you go into a supermarket and everything will be kind of blank boxes because they can augment your vision to make the products kind of stand out with a personalized view rather than traditional advertising. Is that kind of a near-sighted vision, you think?
Well, for me, there's been the rise of the no-name brands and the boxes that are associated with more affordable goods, and they're fairly plain. I still think that brand identity is still going to exist in packaging quite a bit, and in fact, there's a lot of legal requirements for saying certain things on goods as well, and you have to communicate certain information. I think what we'll actually have is that you'll have products that maybe at different times of the day have got different information surrounding them in their orbit. So you might have a cereal and a cereal box, and in the morning there might be activities to motivate kids to eat, or there might be nutritional information for the parents as they sort of go through. But in the evening, there might actually be an experience that's a lot more tuned to adults and associated to other content that's an associated partnership. So I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think we'll be walking into blank supermarkets or whatever. I do think that we could be walking into, blank, pubs and restaurants, and suddenly, one white space one day is a Wild West themed restaurant, the next day it's a 1950s restaurant, the next day it's a futuristic restaurant. I think that is where it's going to get interesting. It's less about those brands, but you might actually find that brands actually come into those experiences, and you might have a restaurant chain that's sponsored by a particular foodstuff brand one evening, or a particular film release, or whatever, and I think that's kind of fun.
Sure. Apologies, we're having a little bit of trouble flicking on the slides, but techies are on it at the moment. Also, just a reminder to the audience, if you've got any burning questions, do feel free to type them in, and we'll try and get through to them as we go, if there's anything that we're kind of covering as we talk. So Nick, where do you think kind of the developments will come from? Do you think it'll be an in-house thing for the brands, or do you think the kind of content producing studios are going to have an absolute resurgence when this kind of ultimately everything augmentable reality kind of comes into play? Where do you think the kind of logistics will come from?
Yeah, I think that there's actually like 2 or 3 different places it can come from. I do think the brands are going to have in-house experienced designers. I do think that ad agencies are going to try and get involved in this, but I think that they're still going to be pushing out the lower value experiences. I think this is the rise of the design content agencies, the people that are really good at this, that can really push it out. I do think that we'll have to have a way of doing cheaper production, and I think that you'll have a distributed model where you might have headquarters in Europe and North America, and they might use cheaper production shops in like India, China, and other places where the workforce is a little cheaper. But I think more importantly, I think there needs to be a way for individuals to create their own experiences and to share into the system. And that's a very complicated ecosystem to be able to design for and to be able to open up with. We live in an age of social content. 10 billion Snapchats are shared every day. Imagine if suddenly, there's 10 billion experiences being fed into, all the people that are using the experience associated with brands every single day. How do you monitor that and police that? How do you look after, how do you really work out what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? These are going to be very challenging times. We'll actually start with curated brand experiences, and then people will work out, once people understand the technology and how that can work, what should and shouldn't be done in those experiences as well.
We've had quite a good question come in from the audience, which kind of takes it in a slightly different direction, but I think I'd be keen to hear both your thoughts. So we've heard a lot about kind of the consumer side of augmented reality and how it's going to help. But how do we think AR is going to impact the B2B companies? Do either of you have any thoughts on this?
Well, when I actually think of business to business, it's about valuable information. If suddenly I'm in a conversation with you and I'm in a meeting situation, we might have 3 or 4 virtual people in the room. Augmented reality would make that in-place meeting, experience a lot more interesting. I think the Microsoft HoloLens is sort of playing with things like holoportation and things like that, where you're in the same room as someone. I think that's going to be really important. I just think it's going to be a way of more easily brokering information and having more genuine interaction. So, for example, even this session, in the future we might be wearing headsets, and like ourselves as presenters and all the people attending could be in a room, and I could be chatting to the person that just posed this question face to face, right? And that leads to a more genuine experience. I think that would lead to a better business experience overall, and would broker a stronger relationship. So I think that's a really positive thing about AR, especially in the context of B2B.
Apologies, we're just re-uploading the slides right now, but we will be back online in just a second. We've had another question come in. Thanks everybody for sending in your questions. We're getting some really good ones coming through. If we were to be kind of overlaying AR on top of vision, that obviously requires the technology to host the augmented vision. But is that something that the consumers are going to have to bear the brunt of that technological advance, because you'll be having to invest in new headsets, probably replacing them once a year or whatever? Or do you think that's going to be taken on by the brands themselves, who invest heavily in the content to drop the price of the tech?
I think there's potentially both options. I mean, if you look at certainly the Western world at the moment, it's hugely consumer-led already. Most people have at least a smartphone, maybe sort of a smartwatch and various other smart devices. I think augmented reality headsets, once they get to that that level of cost-effective manufacturing, most people will probably have them anyway. But you raised a good point there around whether those that can't afford them, maybe there'll be sort of a free or budget option that could be available or produced by whether it's marketing companies, whether it's the brands themselves that want to get their augmented content out there to the masses, and therefore they'll look at the return on investment that they can really sort of get by getting the devices to people and therefore influencing their buying decisions.
Yeah. It's interesting, like 2 billion people in the world have got smartphones, and 6 billion people in the world have got access to cell phone technology. You know, these are hundreds of dollars and even thousands of dollars in some cases of technology that people have got in their pockets. So I think that once the price of headsets and the form factor comes down to something that's a lot more, less freaky and more integrated into real life, I think things are going to get interesting. I actually think we're going to end up in a situation where we're going to have resolution bias. So resolution bias would be, I've got the latest processing box and headset that allows me to have the highest definition experience that people are actually pushing out there. But you might actually have a huge part of the population in your consumer base that's having a low resolution experience. And that bias is going to be like, I'm having a better time than you. And the dynamics that's going to introduce to society is really tough, especially for brands. So brands are almost going to design for the lowest common denominator, but maybe the people that do get the latest equipment and hardware are going to get something very exclusive. And there's maybe going to be partnerships between providers of that technology. I do think you're almost going to end up with these technologies being platforms, those platforms being content brokerages, and you're probably going to have a subsidization model, maybe very similar to what happens with telcos and smartphone manufacturers with subscriptions. That's going to mean that people are going to get more access to things more quickly, but they're going to have to buy in. And this is going to be a huge money-making scheme for both brands and for the service providers as well.
It's going to be a very lucrative game. We've actually had one other question which kind of related to a point we were talking about just 2 seconds ago about this white restaurant where it could be, let's say, a Mexican one day, Chinese the next. It's a bit of a kind of head twister, but will the brands have to really strengthen their own AR experiences so that you know that it is still a Ben & Jerry's, or whatever it may be, a Ben & Jerry's with Mexican flavors, Ben & Jerry's with Chinese flavors the next. Yeah. Maybe not the best example there, but is it down to the brands then to really build these complete experiences which could only be from them?
I actually think that brands are just going to have to sort of listen a lot to what their consumers want. And then it gets really freaky when you might have 100 people in a particular restaurant that's, let's call it a white restaurant as a terminology here. And you might have 100 people having 100 different experiences. I don't think, in the restaurant context, I think the food is going to stay the same. I think the experience could be very different though, really, Suddenly you're looking across at your mom and dad and they're dressed like cowboys. or suddenly you're looking to your friend across the table and they're not really there. They're halfway across the world just having a sandwich in a park, but they just want to be part of the experience. Or suddenly you're going to get bored of an experience halfway through and then you're going to go from a Wild West scenario, flick a switch and then say, right, and suddenly you're under the sea and everything changes. I think that that's really fun. I think that restaurants will be very careful about how they change that, or destinations would be very careful about what defines their brand, and just restrict it down to what they want people to experience. There's going to be a lot of control, and that's going to be a little freaky as well.
Cool. It's going to be an exciting world, especially in terms of building kind of social connections. So let's move on. We've got a few more questions which we'll save for the end. Let's move on to the next slide, and we can talk about how you can geo specify a lot of this advertising and these personalized adverts. Is that going to be one of the main areas of augmented reality, the kind of hyper personalization?
Sorry, Karen.
No, go on, Nick.
No, geofencing's done today. You've got iBeacon technology and all those things, and it's been found to work really, really strongly, especially in the retail context. So I do think that geofencing will kick in. You've also got to work out, it's like suddenly you don't want to be overwhelmed with an experience that suddenly pops into your face. So you've got to work out how you enter and exit a particular geofenced area as well, and how the brand works there. It's going to have to be, you're almost going to have brands that walk up to you and ask your permission to use your data to give you the best experience. And that kind of permission-based marketing is still going to be there in the future, but it's going to be quite jarring. So again, back to the user experience and working out what that means is probably the key.
I think one possible way of managing it, and obviously this is a little bit further down the line, but we are starting to get personalized AR profiles, for example, Siri or Cortana or OK Google or Google Now or whatever, whereby you're building a profile and it's learning what sort of preferences you like when it comes to not necessarily all products, but things like restaurant reviews and places you like to eat, places you like to visit. So if we can potentially take that to the next level, whereby this AI profile is an extension of you, then you wouldn't necessarily need to be bothered by the permission requests all of the time, in that it could handle a lot of those for you, and then every now and then maybe you can do a readjustment or a reassessment of how it's handling those. So only really relevant content will only ever appear.
What do you think the kind of time frame will be on that? Do you think how long will it take before consumers can start to really personalize their AR experiences?
I think people are already considering how that's built in. The trouble is the hardware is so rudimental right now. I mean, we've got okay AR in our cell phones, and you can personalize to a certain extent, just like was commented. I think when we get into deep immersion AR and we think about Matsuda's vision, the trouble is we're going to wait for hardware to catch up. We've only got like the dev kits for the HoloLens today and their restricted field of view, and it's really not an amazing experience. You kind of have to have a lot of faith with what's there today, and understand that it's going to get better. Things like Magic Leap and Meta glasses and whatever are still really, really basic. I actually think in like 5 or 6 years, resolution's going to be better. You're going to actually have more commercially available headsets, and the form factor is going to get smaller. And I think that's going to be the tipping point for everyone starting to pay much more attention. Unfortunately, we're just restricted by sort of the processing and hardware going forward. And secondly, I actually think that telecommunications companies and the network providers are scared. I mean, they're so scared about the sheer amount of data that it's going to take to run these networks. I think you'll have people, very much like you're seeing with Pokemon Go and a lot of kids on the streets, in places like Starbucks and other places that provide free Wi-Fi, trying to have the best experiences they can. And it's almost like brands and locations are going to have like industrial Wi-Fi and capture the consumer in place, so that those experiences can be brokered, really. So I think it's going to be 5 or 6 years before we even get like entry-level, deeper-level augmented reality. But it's going to be a really interesting ride, and that 5 or 6 years is going to be important as we experiment and working out the boundaries of what we should and shouldn't do, and get the feedback from the consumer landscape as well.
it's definitely going to be an exciting few years. It's just kind of, if we can keep a hold of apps like the Pokemon Go breaking the internet as it almost did on its first weekend. Let's move on to the last kind of talking point we've got, which kind of deals with the ethical side of the AR debate. And it's a question that's popped up a few times it's featured in films like The Matrix and Minority Report. But do you think people will be able to live their lives day to day without being plugged into this new hyper reality? Is there the potential for harm? Is there the potential for it to lead to addictions or to a split society with potentially the haves being fully integrated with AR and the have-nots perhaps not? Some key talking points there, but I'd love to get both your thoughts.
I think there's kind of two ways of looking at it. I mean, certainly within the business world or within the sort of leisure industries or the various applications for augmented reality, those who have got the latest equipment are going to have advantages, and they're going to have access to information streams and sort of different resources that those without the hardware or those without the access to it they wouldn't have the advantage of sort of benefiting from those. I think you can also flip it on its head, though, where you'll sort of potentially, in my view anyway, there's the potential for those who can get used to this as a kind of a daily way of doing things, that they're plugged in all the time, so to speak, and it gets to the point where they've got an information overload. Maybe they're going to want time out, where they sort of take a 2-week back to basics break, sort of back to nature, where they're just literally sort of camping in the wilderness with no phone, no connection to the internet, no augmented reality, and sort of look at that as a leisure activity. So there's definitely two ways of looking at it.
Yeah. I think that there's a couple of things that we need to consider when you look at like people and the overuse of technology. Is one, there's the psychological condition associated with needing more, and needing to be rewarded, needing to have affirmation, needing to have that connection with people. But then that psychological condition links absolutely to the somatic condition, like the idea that we're actually chemical. We're chemical beings. So, serotonin, oxytocin, vasopressin, all these things are going to be generated because, if you put on a VR headset today and you get immersion, or say you do play something like Pokemon Go or whatever, you get the buzz and the experience of new experience and the constant flow, which reaffirms that, you're doing well, you're a good person in life, or that, you're having an experience that elicits love or fear or whatever. And that causes chemical body reactions. And that's where addiction comes from. So with augmented reality, suddenly you're not going to be getting texts every 2 minutes. You're almost going to have, your best friend or your girlfriend or boyfriend or whoever, like literally walking beside you 5 minutes of every day. And we're going to start to expect more from everyone, not just brands, but from each other. And that's kind of dangerous. So I think we're going to have to work out some boundaries of, how much you can put in and take out of an experience. And it's going to be that two-way thing. It's like the experience of like you're texting back and forth with someone that you're in a new relationship with, and suddenly the texting stops and you don't hear from them for 10 minutes. The serotonin crash is so bad that you crave that experience and you keep pushing and want more and want more. And I think that's something that could happen in AR and VR. Very much like in the gaming environment, you play Halo for 12 hours straight online. That's not necessarily good for you as an individual, but you need it and you crave it because the psychological and somatic sort of needs of the individual. So I completely agree. You've got to unplug.
Yeah.
It's difficult today, even with like social media and feeling the need of that connection as well. But how many people have got smartphones? And how many people actually turn them off when they sleep? Very few. How many people reach for their phone within the first 15 minutes of waking up? The majority of people, and that's because they need to have that reassurance. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is almost flipped entirely on its head. Instead of waking up and you're thinking, oh, food, sex, warmth, right? You're waking up and you're actually going to the top of the pyramid and needing to have self-actualization straight out of the gate. And that's what's kind of screwing up society and the communication behaviors of who we are as individuals. And that's something that we need to be very cognizant of.
It's definitely something as well where I think there's a question about whether the governments should have a role in protecting and kind of regulating. I mean, we've had a question come through which focused on inappropriate content, so pornography as one aspect. But I mean, I watched, it's virtual reality, not augmented reality, but you can kind of link the two together. But I watched the Stranger Things trailer via my Google Cardboard headset, and it was terrifying. And I wonder what steps need to be taken to stop kind of a 10-year-old kid getting hold of his parents' headset and accidentally going onto adult websites or kind of horror movies, you know, whether it's something that the governments need to be moderating or it needs to come directly from the techies who are producing the headsets or the phones that sit in the headsets. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think when it comes to parental regulation, there's not really much the government can do on that side. It's down to the individual family environment and making sure things are kept out of reach or whatever, and or locked down. And but when it comes to self-regulation of inappropriate content, I mean, you're always going to get people who want access to, well, good or bad things, depending on how society views them at that point. And there's very little you can do to stop determined people. But I think it's, at the end of the day, it's got to come down to the individual. Really, I don't really think there's too much you can do other than putting age limits on certain experiences, like we do with computer games, like we do with movies, etc. I think that's probably the most realistic option.
I mean, the early days of computer games and movies didn't really have a lot of regulation around them as well. I think the early days of AR experiences are going to be like wholly unregulated because the regulators won't know what to do, right? They need to wait until it matures to a certain perspective. But I do think over time you are going to have government regulation, and you know, brands and film and entertainment experiences are going to have to pass, you know, content guidelines, you know, that are actually set by governmental bodies. They're going to have to. This all gets very interesting when you actually travel from country to country. So suddenly you're having completely different experiences, and you might have hugely censored experiences in places like China. Or you might not even have those experiences, but then as soon as you get to North America, you might have something that's a little bit more liberal and open. So, you know, even understanding societal sort of norms and what's acceptable in different geolocations is going to be really tough, especially when you've got a malleable, dynamic, real-time experience that's generated. Are we going to have regulators that understand code? And understand how a system works at its very deep level? It's a really hard thing for governments to consider, to try and wrestle. It's so complex, and you know, we're going to have to step up in terms of who the regulators are. And I think you're going to have huge development and technologically savvy, you know, people ascertaining what the laws and what the boundaries of regulations are. And this is what's going to take quite a time to sort of get to that control. And you know, pornography and you know, explicit content, you know, I think it's actually easy to say, okay, you've registered for this system, it's ascertained that you're a certain age, have at it, right? I think like any kid today, you can completely hack the system and lie. You know, how many people are under 13 in Facebook? It's like you just have to say that you're 13 or over. It's easy, right? I think that validation is going to have to kick in with, you know, identification, parental sort of permission actually kicking in. But that's a huge overhead as well. The early days, I think, is going to have very little to be added from a regulation perspective, but there's going to be a lot of conversations as the world gets weirder.
I can sense a lot of kind of debate around that coming in the future, because I feel like if you accidentally, or if you as a 12-year-old steal a DVD and watch a spooky movie that scares you you'll have nightmares for a few weeks. But if you saw the wrong virtual or augmented reality experience, it could really traumatize you in a deeply human way, because, as you said earlier about the serotonin levels, that on the other hand, it could be something which deeply scares you, and you, once it becomes a certain level of reality, but that's kind of going further down the line. So let's move on now to the kind of the final aspect of this talk, which is the Q&A session. We've had some fantastic questions come through. If you've got anything else you'd like asked, don't hesitate to type them in, and we'll try and get around to them. So we've got a couple of questions here. The first of which, what about AR in a non-commercial capacity? So, for example, the development of Wikipedia in the older internet. Could there be a direction for augmented reality to enhance daily life in that way? So perhaps getting away from the advertising side and the entertainment side and looking at kind of a learning aspect, or just a new app which kind of revolutionizes the way we interact with the world.
I think these are going to have to exist. I think it's in our nature to try and help each other. I also think it's incredibly dangerous. Wikipedia, if you would have actually said years ago, it's like I'm no longer going to look at encyclopedias on the shelves and everything's going to be curated in real time by huge amounts of people around the world, and I'm going to feed information in, then it would have seemed very strange. I do think that services like that or information services are going to become incredibly important from a crowdsourced perspective. I also think policing them is incredibly difficult. I think the biggest question for me in something like Wikipedia or information mechanisms that we can inject either through our phones or augmented reality or whatever is the integrity of that information. So, like if suddenly you're walking along and you're getting information and you're seeing the real-time updates as you're walking along, what can you trust and not trust? There's been a lot of guerrilla campaigns, from a political perspective, that have messed with, information on certain pages in Wikipedia, and it's actually become really, really tough to know what's real and what's not real, and it's disruptive and difficult. I think that crowdsourcing and the community and user-generated experiences are going to be really authentic in AR and VR. I think they're going to be low resolution, but I think they're going to be very high value, especially from an information perspective in communities, during travel, and during maybe even work situations where we're trying to resolve difficult questions and difficult experiences that we're coming across day to day.
And where do you think the kind of main areas and industries are going to pop up? So we've already seen the military embrace augmented reality with their headsets, and Amazon are getting on the mix with the kind of logistics of their warehouses and their drivers. Do we see any other key areas where industries will really embrace the tech, or have done already, perhaps?
I think. Sorry, go on.
No, carry on.
I was going to say, I think a huge one is obviously education, because you can completely transform classrooms into other worlds and really kind of provide exciting experiences, not just for kids, but for I guess for all levels of education, whether it's university studies or even sort of using VR for putting together sort of PhD studies. So I think education is massive as one potential avenue.
Yeah, I just want to add I think you're absolutely right. I think education's going to be huge. I think education's almost going to usher in this, very much like Google Cardboard's being used a lot, and I talk a lot about that. I think medicine. I think there's a lot of money in medicine. I know that, in the early days, Google Glass was actually used, and it's still used by some surgeons to share information, have conversations. I think I worked with a dental company a couple of years ago that were using these deep 3D resolution images and immersing dentists so that dentists can actually see where the drill bit is inside the jaw. And I think, technology is going to allow, those dentists to stop looking at the screen and to look directly into the jaw, almost like X-ray vision. I think that doctors even today are starting to play with the idea of being able to look inside a body and to zoom in and to work out, oh yeah, there's a cancer, we need to do this, here's a particular medical situation that's complex. We can now dive in and spend a couple of hours in AR with our colleagues working out the best way to resolve that situation. So I think medicine is going to be huge. And I think these things are going to be the first high valuable experiences that actually come out of AR and VR. And because there's more money in something like medicine, especially in North America anyway, you're going to find that there's going to be more investment there, and it's going to be developing at a quite faster pace.
We've got another couple of questions here. We've got about 8 minutes left, so we'll try and get through these last two questions. And if you do have one last burning query, do send it through. So in the past, there's another question here from the audience. In the past, there was the concept of virtual university and virtual events, of which this kind of is one, but without the headsets. Will the AR technology be leveraged for this type of product training? So do you think can you envisage a future where you can be taught how to do something via an augmented reality?
Totally, yeah. There's no reason why not. As Nick mentioned earlier, HoloLens has sort of got the feature where, and I'm sure Magic Leap and other similar devices will have a similar kind of feature where you have someone in the room with you, even if they're halfway around the world. So it would be like you've got your own sort of personal tutor, even if you're looking at the lecture from home. So yeah, it's definitely a route that can see more developments.
You could perhaps scrap the IKEA manual and be taught how to set the desk up via your headset.
Yeah, do you know what? That'd be amazing. I mean, it's so difficult to do. I think that this is where brands, this is where educational institutions, conference organisers and everyone, this is where you can actually democratize the access of information. Democracy as much as people that have got the technology can get in the game. There was this big promise from, the world of Second Life and all these virtual conferences, and we can do that. It's really tough. I mean, even this is a virtual conference, as it were, and this is just as effective on this voice and image-based system as it would be to spend, tens of thousands of dollars trying to broker something that feels like you're in the same place as well. I think, we'll just have to work out what people want. I do think what you'll have is you'll still have the physical experience. I think that's going to be important, and you're going to have an augmented participatory sort of element to that as well. I think the absolute, virtual augmented reality, people living in the metaverse is starting, like Janus VR and things like that are sort of ushering the way forward. But it's still a very few people that really enjoy that kind of experience, and people still want to shake hands and hug and connect face to face and go for drinks after talks, right? So I think that those conferences are still going to persevere.
Good. We could usher in the end of manuals and cookbooks and music guides and everything like that. We've got about 5 minutes left, so let's perhaps finish on this question from the audience. So we've seen AR come and go over the last few years, but do we really feel that if phone companies can handle the data volume and if the form factor improves, then it will really take off? Do you agree with that?
I think it's going to take a while. I really think it's going to take a while. I mean, if you've worn a HoloLens or a Meta, space glasses, you look ridiculous. This is very much like be at home and be in the office, but don't have too many people see you doing this. It's not so good. I've kind of predicted that Magic Leap by the end of this year are going to show their product, and I actually think that the reason they haven't shown it is because it's been too big. The form factor's been too kludgy, even though the experience might be great. I think out of everyone producing headsets, I think that someone like Magic Leap knows that the commercial success of its product comes from something that gets out the way of daily life and is just there. So again, as technology gets more advanced and smaller, as things get integrated with normal sunglasses, normal wearable glasses, and maybe even in the future with contact lenses. I think that's where it's really going to pick up. Again, 5-6 years, the world's going to look a little different, and there's going to have to be a lot of changes that kick in. I still think that you're going to have augmented reality really doing a great job in closed experiences like education, medicine, even within the home. I think on the streets it's going to be difficult, mostly because on the streets you've got a problem with photonic recognition in daylight and things like this, which are just like physics. You know, we can't fix some of the physics things right now. And so, yeah, there's going to be a lot of people solving a lot of problems over the next few years. But once a lot of the problems are fixed, so the ability to generate black photons, for example, and very deep textures, that's when there's going to be the tipping point of like something that feels that it can be integrated in lots of different parts of life and in a continuous experience from the moment you wake up to the moment you go back to sleep.
I totally agree. I think if we can get the actual hardware right, looking at what it would take to actually make a big sort of dent in the market, in the consumer market anyway, because as you rightly say, I think within industry it's a no-brainer. It's already useful, and it's going to become more so because people won't care what it looks like or what it feels like to wear. It's more about the experience and what can be offered. In the commercial sort of area, I think potentially we could go down the app route in the sort of let people keep sort of coding simple designs of stuff and see if it works, and if it does, then maybe companies would invest in a higher spec, better version of these applications, just to sort of get products out there that actually people are interested in using day to day, especially if they are, as you say, they're regular glasses or contact lenses or things that don't intrude and get in the way.
Cool. Well, it's been a really fascinating hour. We've covered a lot. I think we're just about getting to the end of our allotted time. To the audience, thank you very much for joining us and for submitting your questions. I think we managed to get through all of them. Once the presentation comes to an end in a minute or so, please give us feedback. Let us know what you thought of the discussion. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to continue the conversation afterwards, our Twitter handles should be coming up, but we're having more slide difficulties. But you can find myself at BrightTALK_Josh. Nick, what's your Twitter handle?
Yeah, it's Nicholas Futurist, NIKOLAS Futurist, and I'm there, and you can go to nicholasbadminton.com and sort of even post me questions directly there. I'm happy to continue chatting.
Yeah, we're all available online, and James runs a LinkedIn group for people who are interested in AR, VR, and in the industry themselves. So, James, do you want to give a bit of background to the group?
Sure, the details should be available coming up on the screen, but basically the group provides a forum for, we've got some of the leading names globally who are at the forefront of this developing technology at the moment in the group already, but it's just a space for people to discuss ideas, to ask questions, and to basically share what they're thinking.
Excellent. The AR/VR Summit on BrightTALK, which is our first summit, is running over today and tomorrow. So we've got a host of the industry's influencers, commentators, and kind of key thinkers. We're running a second event at the end of November, which I'm sure you will hear about via BrightTALK. And this webinar will be available to view on demand in around 20 minutes or so. So please do share it with your friends and colleagues and spread the word. But thank you very much for joining us. Thanks to Nick and thanks to James, and have a great end of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.